Hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Sid Gupta, and I'm a Senior Product Manager with AWS Config. Today I'm going to talk about inventory management and configuration compliance management, especially with regards to the cloud. I'll explain the need for a cloud-aware configuration management database, or a CMDB, and the role that AWS Config plays in this regard. I'll also walk through some demos of our recent launches. So hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'd have a good understanding of AWS Config and how you can use it in your environment. So what is inventory management, and why do you need it? An inventory management system maintains a real-time inventory of your resources and their current and historical configuration. It helps answer questions such as what resources exist in my account, or what does the latest configuration look like for my resources? What relationships exist between my resources, or what configuration changes have occurred in the last week? Or which resources are disabled in my account from an encryption perspective? This information is valuable, especially when you're investigating an operational issue or a security breach. Configuration compliance management, on the other hand, is about verifying that your resource configuration complies with baseline policies or best practices. Now, this could be policies designed to meet your regulatory requirements from PCI or HIPAA, or it could be internal policies defined by your own InfoSec team. A configuration compliance management system for the cloud allows you to define these policies for your resources and alerts you in real time if any resource violates those policies. So together, these two functions support governance initiatives and help simplify compliance by providing you accurate information to assist with decision making. Now, traditionally, these functions were performed by a configuration management database, also known as a CMDB. But you can't use a traditional CMDB to manage your cloud resources. You need some capabilities that are peculiar to the cloud. Because in the cloud, your resources are dynamic. You've got things like auto-scaling and spot instances, where resources come and go multiple times in a day. You can't rely on nightly jobs to discover new resources in your account. You need real-time discovery of resources so that your incident and change management processes have accurate information at all times. You need to track configuration changes for your critical workloads and get alerted instantly so that you can minimize downtime for your workloads. You also need mechanisms in place to evaluate configuration changes in real time against your baseline policies to avoid going out of compliance. And you need your CMDB to be accessible via APIs so that it can be easily integrated with other tools. So in short, what you need is a cloud-aware CMDB. Now that's where AWS Config comes into play. AWS Config is a native tool within AWS that is integrated with other AWS services such as CloudFormation, CloudTrail, CloudWatch, and AWS organizations. From an inventory management perspective, it discovers resources in real time automatically without using an agent. It tracks configuration changes to those resources and maintains a configuration history that you can use for your audit and operational troubleshooting purposes. It also performs the configuration compliance function by allowing you to define policies using config rules and then evaluating your resources against those rules, either periodically or every time a configuration change occurs. It alerts you in real time about configuration and compliance changes so that you can take corrective action. And lastly, it is also easy to integrate it with your own CMDBs such as ServiceNow so that you can still make use of your existing investments. So in summary, you should consider AWS Config as your CMDB for AWS resources, or more importantly, a configuration auditor for AWS. Now, AWS Config is commonly used for audit and compliance reasons, since it maintains a change log for all configuration changes that occur to your resources. It also keeps track of the compliance history so that you know when your resources went in and out of compliance. It is used for operational governance. For example, you can evaluate your CI/CD pipeline configuration to ensure auto rollback is enabled on the pipeline. Or for cost optimization by identifying resources that are unused and then terminating them. AWS Config is also commonly used for security intelligence. For example, reviewing the changes that occurred after a security breach, or identifying resources that are not encrypted. And lastly, AWS Config can be easily integrated with your ITSM tools to enable incident and change management workflows at your end. So today we support about 72 different resource types spread across 26 AWS services. Now this covers most of the commonly used services that need to be tracked from a governance perspective, and we are committed to continue adding support for more services over time. All right, so it's demo time. So in this demo, let's see how you can track configuration changes and verify compliance using AWS Config. Okay, so let me go to the config console here. Now, as you can see, we present a dashboard where you can see all the resources that exist in your account, and you have the breakdown by resource type. And on the right-hand side, you have information related to compliance. So let's go through some of the information here. So when you turn on AWS Config in your account, the first thing that it does is it discovers these resources in your account. It is completely agentless. We will just go ahead and discover the resources and enumerate it over here on the console. You can also retrieve this information through our APIs. So let me go here and click on a security group, for example. So I can see a list of all security groups that exist in my account, and I can also see the compliance status for those resources. So let me go ahead and select a security group. So right at the top, I can see a timeline of all configuration changes that occurred on this resource. I can go to any point in time and view the configuration of that resource. I can see the metadata associated with this resource, such as the configuration details. Now this information is typically what you get from a describe API call for that resource. But in addition to that, we also pull tags. So you can see the tags listed there. And we also retrieve the relationships. So for example, how this security group is related to an EC2 instance or a VPC. You can also see the configuration changes that occurred on this resource. So we show the prior value of the configuration and the current value of the configuration. So this gives you a good understanding of how the configuration changed. In this case, you can see that the IP address in the ingress settings changed from a lockdown IP to a wide open range. So basically somebody made the security group wide open. We will also collect the CloudTrail events that occurred during that time frame to give you an idea of what API activities occurred when this particular configuration change happened. Now, AWS Config captures all this information and normalizes it in a form known as a configuration item. So all the information present here is things like the configuration, the tags, the relationships. Those are all normalized into a CI or configuration item, and you can retrieve this information through our APIs. Okay, so let's go back to the dashboard. Now let's look at some of the compliance aspects. So AWS Config has the config rules part, which is really a compliance engine. So out of the box, we offer about 82 different managed rules. Managed rules are rules that are authored by AWS. So this covers all the rules related to various resources that we support today in config. So for example, this is a managed rule called restricted SSH, and it basically identifies security groups that are wide open for port 22. So I can see a list of resources that are violating this rule. So let me quickly go over to the EC2 console. I can do that through this config console itself. And let me modify the inbound settings for the security group. So in this case, I'm going to lock it down to have only my source IP address in the ingress range. All right. So now that I've made this configuration change, let's go back to the config console and see if it detected this configuration change. So since I locked down my security group, it shouldn't be wide open anymore. And my resource should now show up as compliant as far as this rule is concerned. So let me drill down into this group. So here's the security group that I modified. So as you can see, it is now compliant. So to summarize what I just did, I modified a security group. AWS Config detected that change and immediately evaluated the rule that was associated with this security group, and then marked it compliant. So it's an automated system that is detecting these changes continuously, and this is what you need in the cloud. Okay, so let me click on the timeline page for this resource. So as you can see, there are two changes that are detected. And here you can see that the security group was modified. So it went from a wide open IP address range to my particular IP. And you can also see the CloudTrail events associated at this time. So it tells you who made that change. All right. So just a quick recap. So I gave you a demo about how you can use AWS Config to track changes to your resources and evaluate compliance using config rules. So now let me talk about some of our recent launches that will help with inventory management and configuration compliance management. So I'm super excited to talk about a new feature that we launched last week. It's called Advanced Query, and it allows you to query the configuration of a resource based on its properties. Now, this is really valuable because now you have a single endpoint to query exactly what you need without performing AWS service-specific API calls. It uses a subset of SQL Select as the query language, and we've provided some sample queries out of the box in order to get you started quickly. Advanced Query is available at no additional cost for AWS Config customers, and it's available in all public regions and the Gov Cloud. You can use Advanced Query for inventory management, for example, identifying EC2 instances of a particular size, or MySQL databases running an old version. You can also use it for cost management by searching for EBS volumes that are not attached to any EC2 instance. You can use it for change management to understand the impact of a change by looking at the resource relationships. And you can use it for security management by searching for resources that are publicly accessible. So getting started is really easy. In fact, let me give you a quick demo. Okay, so in the AWS Config console, you can go to the Advanced Query tab on the left-hand side under Resources. So here you can see a SQL query editor. We've got a few sample queries out of the box. So let me select a query here. Let's say I want to list all EC2 instances that are currently running in my account. You can look at the query here and let me run it. So you can see the full list of resources or the EC2 instances that are currently running in my account. Now I can also modify this query. So let's say I want to look for EC2 instances that are extra large in size. So let me copy this here. And I can use the like expression here to find any EC2 instance that is extra large. Let me run this query. So here, as you can see, it identified one instance that is extra large. So let's try another query here. So let's say I want to see all EBS volumes that are not in use. So as you know, if an EBS volume is not in use, you're still incurring costs. So from a cost management perspective, this query is really valuable. So I'm going to look for EC2 volumes that are not in use. Run this query. So you can see a bunch of volumes here that are just sitting in my account and incurring costs. You can see the state is available, meaning they're not in use. Okay, let's try another query. So let's say I want to list all resources that are related to a particular security group. Now, since AWS Config captures the relationships between resources and normalizes it in the form of a configuration item, you can use the queries to query relationships. So a security group could be used across service boundaries. For example, it could be shared with an EC2 instance or an RDS instance, or maybe an Elasticsearch cluster. So this query would help in identifying all the resources that are using this particular security group. So let me change the security group ID here real quick. Okay, and let me run this query. So you can see that there is an RDS instance that is using the security group, and there is also an EC2, a bunch of EC2 instances that are using the security group. So the relationship query goes across service boundaries, and this was a useful query. So let's try another query here. So let's say I want to identify all RDS instances that are publicly accessible. So this is useful from a security management perspective. So I run this query and I found 3 instances where the publicly accessible setting is set to true. Okay, let's do one last query just to show you the aggregation capability in the query. So you can use aggregate functions like count. So let's see here. So this one counts all the non-compliant resources in my account and gives you the breakdown by type, by resource type. So here I've got all the resource types and their compliance count. So this gives me a good idea of which resource types are most non-compliant, and I can take corrective action. All right. So you saw how you could use advanced query for inventory management. Now let me talk about another exciting feature that we just launched with regards to configuration compliance management. So as I mentioned earlier, AWS Config evaluates your resources either periodically or upon detecting a configuration change using the policies that you define using config rules. Now earlier this month, we launched a remediation capability in config, which provides a managed experience for you to take a corrective action on your non-compliant resources. Now, all of the managed config rules come with recommended remediation actions. Some are targeted specifically at the resource, while some are generic, like raising a Jira ticket. You can select one of those actions or create your own action using Systems Manager automation documents. Systems Manager automation docs allow you to create workflows, such as adding approval steps or do velocity control. And you can call any AWS API as well through the document. So if you have any existing Lambdas or scripts, you can easily port them into an automation doc. Now, once the remediation action has been set, you can manually invoke the action through the console or using the APIs. Pricing is based on the Systems Manager automation documents. There is a free tier for that. And once you exceed the free tier, you're charged using the standard pricing for automation docs. This feature is available in all AWS public regions and in the GovCloud West region. Getting started is really easy. First, select a manage rule, then add a remediation action, and then invoke the action either via the console or through the API. In fact, let me give you a quick demo. Okay. So let me go to the rules console. I can see a lot of the rules that I have in my account. So I'll select one of these rules called S3 bucket public write prohibited. So this rule identifies all S3 buckets that have the publicly accessible settings set to true for write permissions. So as you can see, it has identified one bucket here, which is non-compliant. So I'll go ahead and edit this rule. Now you can scroll down and you can see that there is a remediation action section. So here I can choose a remediation action. So we give you a recommended action, but you're free to write your own action as well. So let me just go ahead and select the recommended action. So in this case, it will disable the S3 public write permission and bring it back into compliance. So I also need to specify the parameters that would feed into the automation doc, the SSM automation doc behind the scenes. So I'll go ahead and save this rule. So now, as you can see, a remediation action is associated with the rule. So now all I need to do is invoke that action, either through the console or through APIs. So click on the rule here and click Manage Remediation. So I've got a couple of buckets here that are non-compliant. So I can either select a specific bucket or choose all of them and click on Remediate. So as you can see, the automation doc executed successfully. So now just to confirm, let's go and navigate over to the SSM console, Systems Manager. Click on Automation. So you can see that the automation doc was executed here successfully. You have the timestamp here. Let me click on this. You can see all the steps that are listed inside the doc and the status of those steps. So if you need any more details on the automation doc and its execution, this is a good place to find that information. All right, so let's go back to the config console and just check the status of our resources, whether they're back into compliance. So let me see here, let me refresh it. Still shows as non-compliant. Let me refresh it again. Usually takes a couple of minutes. So, all right, so don't see it in the non-compliant anymore, so that means it is compliant. So let's scroll down here. Yeah, so you can see that the bucket is now compliant. The action was executed successfully. I can click on the bucket here, and there's also something known as the compliance timeline. So let's click on that. So this is a timeline where basically you will come to know when your resource went in and out of compliance. As you can see here, previously my bucket was non-compliant. You can see the changes here, like it went from compliant to non-compliant at some point in time, and then the remediation action kicked in, and now it went back from non-compliant to compliant. So this history is really useful for auditing purposes. Whenever you're working with your auditors, either internal or external, at least you have full traceability and auditability of all the actions that occurred on your resource. So it's really useful to use AWS Config from that audit standpoint. Okay. All right. So let's talk about some of the other launches that happened in the first quarter. We added support for AWS Service Catalog and Amazon API Gateway. So now you can go ahead and track changes to the configuration of these resources. You can also create config rules and evaluate your resources against best practices or your own internal policies. So to summarize, I explained the importance of inventory management and configuration compliance management in the cloud. I also went through capabilities needed in a CMDB to become cloud aware and how AWS Config can help in this regard. Features like advanced query and config rules remediation help in these aspects, and I really encourage you all to give it a try in your environment and let us know what you think. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you very much, and now we can go through some of your questions.